Welcome back to AP World History. This is Chapter 27. We're looking at Russia and Japan transferring or uh, coming into the industrial age, industrializing, making that transition. Certainly, Russia uh, sees what the West is doing, and they're going to be moving in that direction. They don't want everything, but they would like to have a stronger economic system. Alexander the Second is going to pull back from some of the reforms that he made. Eventually, he's going to be assassinated. There are several different groups at this time that are really opposing the Tsar. The intelligentsia, this was the educated folks from Russia who had studied in the West, and they know how things are in the West and the standard of living and some of the ideas of equality and civil rights and so forth. And they would like to see things changed in Russia. And so they're demanding it. They're not as bloodthirsty as the radicals. These are the anarchists who just said, well, no form of government's any good, so let's just throw it all out. And then there will be another group called the Bolsheviks, and these will be the socialists, and we'll talk about them in just a second. But Alexander II is assassinated. Now, the road to revolution. Certainly, when you have new ideas coming in, uh, people are going to know that there's a better way, a better standard of living, other places where people experience more freedom. And when you've had a taste of freedom, you certainly want more, or you want your country to live up to your expectations. The peasants aren't too happy, even though they've been freed as serfs. They still have to pay their redemptive payments. That is, until they pay that, they can't really leave the land. Famines certainly provoked protest, food shortages. Um, Radical intelligentsia, people articulating these ideas to uh, the workers, the peasants, telling that there's a better way. Uh, so there's a lot of social unrest in Russia. Uh, so many of the radicals are anarchists who want to end all formal government, and they recruited the peasantry and workers. Uh, when you feel like you don't have anything to look forward to, you can use repression for a certain length of time, but eventually that's not going to work. And this is what's going to happen eventually by 1917, towards the end of World War One. The Russians are losing badly, um, and the country falls apart, and eventually the Tsar will be killed by the Bolsheviks. So Russia is, we could point to as one of the first large modern terrorist movement, that is, to remove the government. Vladimir Lenin is going to introduce the Marxist theory, which simply says that the poor will rise up and throw off the yoke of the rich, the bourgeois class. They call the workers the proletariat. The Bolsheviks are going to introduce this concept to the Russian people, and they will promise them bread and land and a chance to get out of the war, and the Russian people are going to buy it. As cities grew, there was certainly a greater working class, and they are demanding more. And the workers become more radical, and eventually they will follow the Western revolutionaries. Now, one of the sad things that happens to the Russians, from their perspective, is that they lose to the Japanese, who they see as a third-rate country in the world. And the Russians are looking to blame somebody for this. Maybe you could deal with the Crimea loss, but losing to the Japanese was unexcusable. And this is going to give the Japanese an opportunity to take more land in the east. Um, and certainly give notice to China and Russia and some of the Western powers that the Japanese have arrived, and we'll look at them in just a moment. The Russian Revolution breaks out after the loss of the Russo-Japanese War in 1905. Uh, there was a lot of strikes, uh, political terrorism. There were mutinies in the army, peasant unrest. One of the things that the Tsar will do is he will create a Duma uh, and said, well, everyone's going to have a chance to vote throughout Russia. Of course, this isn't the way it's going to be because the Russian Duma is not going to have much power. The Stolpen reforms introduced peasants were granted freedom from redemption payments. Of course, after 30 years of making these payments, they welcomed not paying it, but they wondered why it took so long. So this isn't going to win too much favor among the peasants. And so we'll see Russia being transformed from a monarchy into a communist country in 1917, and there will be a civil war shortly after, and eventually the communists will prevail. Now we're going to see how Japan transformed to an industrial nation without revolution. In fact, the Japanese are going to do much better than the Russians and the Ottoman Empire, the Chinese, the Egyptians, in terms of coming in this modern era. We sort of looking back in chapter 22 and further. They had accepted ideas from China. They kind of looked at them as a model. They're going to fall into a isolationist period. There's going to have a shogun who will be in control. It really is a feudal system, much like Europe was in the Dark Ages. It's the government doesn't have much money, can't fix much in the country. During this period, the Japanese gradually become more and more secular. You remember that they had embraced Shintoism and Buddhism, but that seems to be waning. Confucianism still has a role in their society. Schools and academies expanded during this time, but slowly. A minority group called the Dutch Studies will emerge in Nagasaki, and they will translate things from the West. They believe that there is some good information that they can glean from the West to improve their own country. Commerce and manufacturing expanded, but there were certainly limitations because it didn't have the technology. In 1853, American Matthew Perry arrived in Edo, which is Bay, which is Tokyo, and delivers a message to the shogunate and says that he would like to. He brings a message from his president Fillmore that they would like to open up trade. Of course, the Japanese say no, no thanks, we're not interested. At that, Matthew Perry says, "Well, I'm going to be back in about 3 months, and I'm going to have a whole bunch of other ships with me. And certainly we'd hope that you make the right decision." And when he returns, the Japanese say, "Well, those ships out there look very formidable, and this was not a good time to go toe to toe with the Americans." And so, as a result of this gunboat diplomacy, that is, using a strong arm, using threatening force, the Japanese open up a couple of ports, and other countries will follow suit. Now, the bureaucrats of the shogunate, the shogun, see no alternative, so they bring Japan into the 19th century. Excuse me. The samurai aren't too crazy about this idea, and they're going to revolt in 1866. But eventually, the shogunate troops using modern weapons will subdue them, and this will usher in what they call the Meiji period. Matsushito is the he becomes the emperor of Japan at the age of 15. And he's going to bring about some reforms to help Japan compete with the Western powers. He's going to replace the feudalism system of the daimyos. They're going to surrender their powers. There's going to be prefects answerable to the emperor. Samurai soldiers, officers were sent abroad to study economics and political institutions to find out which were who had the best ideas. The Meiji ministers abolished the samurai class, and they're going to be accountable to the emperor. Now, these officers who go abroad are going to pick and choose the things that they think are going to be best suited for Japan. They're going to model their army after the Germans and their navy after the British. Their educational system will be modeled after the Americans, as having public education. In a short time, they are going to start building railroads. They're going to build ironclad ships. In fact, they're going to have, within about 30 years, they're going to have 40 ironclad warships. They're going to build railroads throughout Japan. And the government is going to they're going to glean the information from the West, and Japan is going to be on the march. The new government funded in industrialization. They're going to adopt many of the Western styles of dress and education, customs, and so forth. There is sort of a dichotomy here. They're still going to be tied to the somewhat to the past in terms of Confucianism and the respect for elders and venerating the emperor, but they are going to gain a national identity. One of the problems that the Japanese will face is that they are resource poor, and they're going to have to look from other places to get raw materials. They will adopt certain things from the West, for instance, the calendar, the metric system. They will also have haircuts and so forth. One of the things that they will encounter, and they'll have covetous eyes in Korea. They will come in conflict with the Chinese. But the Sino-Japanese War will ensue from 1894 to 1895, and the Japanese will prevail, pointing out the fact that China was really not the big bad bully that she purported to be. Japan also will fight the Russians, as we talked about earlier in Part 1, in 1904, and they will defeat the Russians, which was, for many, an eye-opener. And they will, by 1910, annex all of Korea and force them to trade with them. They will become a colony of Japan up until the end of World War II. They will also expand eventually into Manchuria. So they're going to be a force to be reckoned with. Certainly there's going to be a conflict between the old and the new, but they're going to overcome this. And they do this all without a real revolution like some of the other nations. And we're going to stop there and in the future.